Hello, it's Peppermint. Last year I got introduced to and fell madly in love with Dragon Ball, a series so famous it needs no introduction, but which I had never really taken a look at growing up. Naturally, I was overcome with the need to consume, as you do, and while it would seem like something as huge as Dragon Ball would have all the merch in the world, turns out many of the characters I want figurines of either don't really exist, or they cost an arm and a leg. I'm an artist, I can't afford that kind of stuff, so instead I'm trying to cope by making some small figurines of my own, and I'm going to show you and tell you how. Before we get to that, I apologize for my accent and awkwardness, I hope you can be patient with me. Thanks for being here. This is also my first partially scripted video, so we'll see how it goes. So, I actually made one figurine last year already. As a sort of a test run, I guess. My brother Raimani, whom you should be following by the way, check out his games on Steam, check out his streams, follow him on Blue Sky and YouTube. He has a 3D printer. This idea to print our own figurines kind of just manifested on its own after I picked up Dragon Ball Fighter Z for dirt cheap on a Steam sale and showed him the cute low poly chibi character models in the game, the ones you use in the overworld menu. I kind of threw out the idea of printing some of them, but still Rai just printed this shrimp and gave it to me one morning. I painted him, we glued him together, and he looks nice on my shelf. Now, it would be super fun if I could make my own character 3D models, but I've yet to find the courage and self-control to start learning Blender. I could also hypothetically craft my own out of polymer clay or a similar material, but I don't really have any tools for that, or materials, and I don't have the skills necessary for that either. Like, I'm actually not a crafts kind of person at all, or a sculptor. But ripping the models from a game I own, 3D printing them and painting them is something I can do with my limited skill set, with the help of my siblings of course. I chose 3 characters to be printed. First up, Zamasu. Because the only nice Zamasu figurine that I've been able to find online was limited release and costs a lot of money, and I can't afford it for now. Maybe one day, when I become rich and famous. The second character we printed was Goku Black, to go with my Zamasu. There are many Goku Black figurines out there, but I wanted one that matches Zamasu, and the specific Goku Black figurine I would like to own was also a limited release and costs a lot of money online. And lastly, we printed sort of a shared sibling favorite, Chaozu. Again, not a lot of good Chaozu figurines out there, like not at all. There is a tiny Chaozu that comes with an SH Figuarts TN figurine that is pretty good, but I want a Chaozu of its own. We love him. I'm not going to tell you how to rip the models from the game, but even at the time of me filming this you can find all the information you need really easily via Google. Rai, who actually knows how to use Blender, because he's an indie developer, did some adjustments to the models purely to ensure they're solid enough to be printed, but I also asked him to pose Goku Black and Zamasu in a specific way, and to remove their earrings. He also split the models in 2 parts, because both printing and painting are going to be easier that way. Here's a super rough informative graph I made for Rai to explain the changes I wanted him to do for the models, even though I decided that he should remove all Totoro earrings only after putting this together. Here it still says that only remove one of Zamasu's earrings. Rai's printer is a Creality Ender S1 Pro, and the filament we used is just basic white PLA. The printer resides within a homemade ventilated cabinet to make sure our cats can't get to it and to make sure any potential printing fumes go straight outside instead of staying indoors. This normal PLA doesn't have toxic fumes, but it's still for the best to avoid breathing in plastic fumes in general, you know. The globs being printed may look strange, but all the excess shapes are necessary support structures to ensure the object being printed won't collapse in on itself. With weird and complex shapes like Goku Black's hair, for example, that's especially necessary. Now please enjoy some high-speed footage of Chaozu being printed. After printing, the support structure is cut off from the figurine parts. That, along with any potential printing imperfections and the fact that any spiky parts print out super sharp, are why you need to sand the parts next. Rai didn't model Zamasu's neck quite correctly, so that needed to be adjusted via sanding. And also the tip of one of his ears broke off during printing, so we decided to sand his other ear to match instead of reprinting the whole head. I could have done the sanding myself, but Rai offered to do it for me and is more experienced in it, so yeah, here's some footage of him doing it with some good old sanding paper. Remember to wear a mask and/or work in a well-ventilated room or outside when sanding. After sanding, Rai primed all the figurine parts with Vallejo white hobby paint spray. It's a fast-drying paint specifically designed for miniature and figurine painting. Priming isn't 100% necessary, but it's a good practice because it helps paint stick to your figurine or whatever else you're going to be painting. In the case of a 3D printed object, it's especially good since it smooths out the texture surface somewhat, and most paints you would use for painting figurines don't actually stick really well on top of the filament in itself. All the parts were left to dry overnight, then I put all the figurine parts in my glass door cabinet to wait until I had time to paint the figurines. Finally, I get to do something myself! I'm using acrylic paints for most of the painting, no specific brands, just whatever old bottles we have lying around the family house from past projects. But of course, this actual artist brand Winsor & Newton Titanium White has a really good consistency for getting an even layer of color, so I mix it in for every figurine's skin tone as opposed to using a different tube of white. I painted Goku Black's skin twice, as the first layer wasn't covering the white base enough for my liking, and I wasn't entirely satisfied with the exact tone. I used the titanium white and mixed a new skin tone to paint over. I used some of the excess white I poured out for Chaozu's skin to paint the white parts of his clothes as well. Again, you don't necessarily need to paint white on top of white primer, but I like it for a more consistent look. Titanium white acrylic also has a little bit of a nice gloss to it, and is purer than the primer white. Once this layer of paint has dried enough, I use my Pilot Color E&O colored lead pencils to sketch in where everyone's facial features should be. The leads are fairly water soluble, so I'm hoping that if I make a mistake or something I can use a wet pencil to wipe away the lines. Overall, painting faces is the most stressful part, since they need to be symmetrical. These specific models barely even have noses, so you might think there aren't many anchor points for eye placement and whatnot, but the low polyness of the models came in clutch. I knew where to draw by following the ridges separating each polygon. I also sketched in the kanji on Chachu's clothes. I'm going to paint him in the Crane School green and yellow because the striking colors are appealing. But chose the kanji for dumpling he has on his newer clothes as opposed to the original crane kanji. The second painting day was far less smooth than the first. I did the first layers of black and red areas for each figurine and painted the remaining white areas that I hadn't yet painted. And I painted Samasu's eye whites and eyebrows and Goku Black's eye whites and grinning mouth. I used a bit of a white Posca marker on top of white acrylic in these parts to make these relatively small areas more opaque on top of the skin color. I made a lot of small mistakes, but hopefully further paint layers will allow me to fix some of them. I also accidentally painted a red streak on Samasu's hair, but thankfully wiping it repeatedly with a wet clean brush got it all off. The third painting day I dedicated to finishing off the first color layer of all the remaining areas. Goku Black's grey garment is too dark and the green I tried to mix for Chachu's clothes is too bright, so I'll have to fix both in the next color layers. The fourth painting day was simply spent on finishing all these layers, achieving smooth reds and greys for one. Zamasu's sleeves and trousers aren't quite as smooth as I would have liked, but honestly they're fine. I added a touch of shimmery white to his hair for some additional depth and texture. On the fifth painting day I did the second layer of all yellow parts, finished painting all the black parts with the second layer, and tried to finish Chachu's green clothes. Unfortunately, this green paint simply is not good enough. 3 layers and still no coverage, so I decided to use a green Posca paint marker. That worked like a dream, but then the marker ran out of color before I was finished. So I had to put all these figurines aside to wait until I'd be able to go buy a new marker. After a week or so I was able to visit the city and could get back to work on these, so Chachu's base colors are finally finished. I also found some pearlescent beads in different sizes that are the perfect color for Potara earrings, so I don't need to try to paint any beads we had lying around the house. Finally time to draw in the remaining details with brush tip markers, fine liners and paint markers. The kanji on Chachu's clothes came out kinda scuffed, and I messed up his face so much so that I had to draw over with a white paint marker and then painstakingly try to make my lines a bit neater, and I'm still not sure if his face is neat enough. You can tell one eye is bigger than the other. But oh well. When working with media such as this you just have to roll with it. I'm still not sure if I should have drawn like a line defining the arms against the body, but I suppose this looks fine since the areas are separated by colors instead of being white on white, for example. Since these are chibi figurines, I decided to leave the ears without details. Those would probably just be distracting. Goku Black's face was the easiest to draw. I did some creases to make sure he looks evil. His clothes also didn't need much work, I just tidied up some of the black parts and added a touch of texture to the red belt. Zamasu was quite difficult to finish. I'm still not sure if drawing a black line around his collar was the right thing to do since there's no black lines separating his shoulder things from his arms or his trousers from the hem, but it is what it is. I used a light blue marker to add some details to his belting and used the same marker to add texture to his hair and eyebrows. I didn't necessarily need to do this, but I do think it adds to the whiteness, especially since Samasu's eyes and mouth are drawn with black markers. I think his eye color is maybe a tad too dark and eye shape a tad too squinted, but I suppose it's fine. The beads I'm using for the Potara earrings are just a tiny little bit too big to do any crafting with cord and wire, which was the initial plan, but it's all good. I just drew the earring handles with a gold paint marker straight on the figurine's ears and glued the beads directly to them. My brother Rai helped me with the gluing because, as I said before, I'm not good at crafting at all, but both of my siblings are. I didn't film the gluing because it was super precise and frankly boring, but we used this 2-component epoxy adhesive. I do not recommend using typical super glue because, at least in our past experience, it does not work super well with PLA filaments. At least not the kind we have. It's hard to describe, but superglue seemed to almost melt the plastic a bit, creating a strange, slightly fuzzy texture, so to say. This epoxy adhesive is good quality and suitable for pretty much any small size scrapwork we've done around the house. First we glued the beads to the evil guy's ears, like I said before, and left them to dry overnight. Next the heads of the characters were glued to their bodies. As Samasu's neck is the incorrect shape and Goku Black's hair very heavy, we propped them upside down with Lego to dry. Chaozu was so much simpler, you could just glue on his head and immediately glue him to the base too and lay him to dry like that. Zamasu and Goku Black's bases were glued on in the evening after a good 5-ish hours of drying after the previous session. all 3 figurines have been drying overnight, and here they are. Let's take a closer look at the finished figurines. Chaozu's face isn't perfect. The kanji is too squished on this side and there's too much empty space on this side. And of course these aren't super neat, but for homemade figurines I think they're pretty cool, especially since Chaozu doesn't really have a lot of figurines out there. I think Chaozu maybe came out the best out of these. Of course, now up close I can only look at all the mistakes, but I'm sure I'll forget about them with time and just enjoy the figurine for what it is. You can tell the green Posca marker is much more matte than the acrylic paints are, but it's fine. The important thing is that the color is right. No shine on Goku Black's hair because that's a typical part of his design, so I painted it all just black with no additional details. Just the model of his hairstyle has plenty of detail on its own. The face is a bit scary, but that's on purpose. I think I might like his face best out of all 3. I'm really glad that we were able to glue Zamasu's head on in spite of his weird neck, and that we found a way to use the bead for his earring even though there's not a lot of space here. So yeah, that's how I made some Dragon Ball figurines at home to cope with the fact I can't afford the official ones. I hope you enjoyed the little video. Like I said, I'm not good at crafts, usually I just do traditional artwork. And usually when I make art process videos I don't talk, I just play music, but if you want to hear me talk, please let me know if there are any topics you'd be interested in. Thanks again so much for watching, I really appreciate it. If you'd like to support my work, please consider checking me out on Patreon. You can follow me there for free to never miss any of my art posts. Follow me on Blue Sky. My commissions are always open, so feel free to reach out via email. I draw pretty much anything, but I'd be super happy if someone commissioned me to draw Dragon Ball stuff. And if you are already a Patreon super subscriber, for just €3 a month you can see videos like this before anyone else. Shout out to my super supporters here in text form. Thank you all so much for the support, thank you so much for watching, I really appreciate it. Bye bye!